Emotional content is filmed on Whadjuk Noongar land. This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. This episode contains discussions of suicide and other challenging life experiences that may be distressing to some listeners. Please take care when listening. For immediate support, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. Additional resources are available on our website at emotionalcontent.com.au. Come for the stories, stay for the connection. I'm your host, Amy Jane Brand, and this is your weekly dose of emotional content. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Emotional Content. I am so happy that you're here. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you about something that I think, especially in Australian culture, affects so many of us in different ways, whether it's affected you personally, whether it's made an impact in your relationships, in your family. Alcohol plays a big role in our society, and it's just something that I felt really called to talk about. My journey with alcohol has changed so much over the years, going from underage drinking to binge drinking through my teens and 20s to now barely drinking at all. I feel like I've come a long way when it comes to my relationship with alcohol. In today's episode, I'm going to be telling you about some of my worst drunk stories, my personal journey with alcohol, and the reasons why I decided to stop binge drinking altogether, as well as the negative side effects that I have experienced with alcohol over the years. I think for a lot of people, growing up in general makes you drink less because the recovery is harder. But for me, that is a big role in why binge drinking is a lot less and basically doesn't exist in my life anymore. But the main reason for me was actually to do with my career and the goals that I have for myself and how much alcohol and binge drinking actually gets in the way of that. I really had to look at the bigger picture when it comes to my wellness and mental health, and alcohol plays a very negative role in trying to get on track with that type of thing. So that's the reason I had to make a really big change for myself. And I wonder if any of this is going to resonate with you, or whether you've felt the pressures of drinking with the Aussie culture and how strong it is within our community. So hopefully something out of this conversation will resonate with you. Look, I have had some insane drunk nights in my time, some embarrassing and some I wish I could forget. But now I barely get drunk anymore, and the thought of a bender makes me feel like a corpse. So let's get straight into talking about it. When I was thinking of crazy stories to tell you guys, I had to be quite selective because majority of it involves some kind of illegal activity, and the podcast is probably not the correct space to be talking about that type of thing. So I've had to be fairly careful with what I have shared. However, I have pulled 3 funny stories that I can think of. The first one has to be a house party when I was very young. I was still in high school. I think I was year 10, and there was this chick that went to another school, and she used to have these insane house parties, and her mum would just let all of these kids go absolutely wild in her house, which was pretty dangerous. There was a lot of crazy shit I saw at these house parties actually, and it was from a young age seeing some stuff that I probably would have been better if I hadn't seen. But I specifically remember rocking up late to one of these, I guess they were almost monthly. Yeah, they were around monthly house parties. Everyone from different schools would turn up and people would get absolutely shit-faced. And I remember rocking up, and this was back when like cowl necks were really in, like the really low ones, and you'd wear a bikini top underneath, and then you'd wear jeans and sneakers, and that was like a look. That was a big sleigh back then. Anyway, I rocked up and I had a 6-pack of double-strength bullet bourbons, and to this day, I cannot smell a bullet bourbon. That bourbon I haven't been able to touch ever since this evening. So I decided it would be a good idea to knock back 6 cans of this as fast as possible. And I remember feeling so drunk that my whole body was numb. And I was a little frame back then as well, so I was very skinny. I remember walking into the house, went to the toilet and then went to the bathroom to wash my hands. I was fixing my makeup and I was fixing my bikini top underneath. And like I said before, my body was feeling super numb. So I had adjusted this top and then walked out into the party. And I remember walking past the mum and a couple of older people, which this is super bizarre, but this was the first time I actually saw someone smoking pretty heavy drugs. It was inside the house. I'm pretty sure it was the mum or the mum's friends and some older boys all looked at me and just looked me up and down really bizarrely and kind of laughed. And then I looked at them because they were smoking drugs I'd never seen before. And it wasn't weed, it was much harder shit. And I was like, okay, that's weird. Never seen that before. Don't know what it is. And walked out the front door, through the garage, out the back. And keep in mind, like when I was at school, there was a significant group of boys that would always give me a hard time and bully me. And I had all these people pointing and laughing at me. I didn't know why until I looked down and both of my boobs were just like out, but like folded weird because my top had just like crushed them down. It was absolutely tragic. And then I remember later in the evening, I just progressively got more and more drunk from those drinks. I tried having some water. I ended up in a 3-way hookup because that was like a thing back then. I mean, you see them do it on Love Island now and they're just these like, it's just like a tongue punch war. They're just so fucking stupid. Anyway, I remember doing that with 2 other girls and then I soon after ended up projectile vomiting into the swimming pool that everybody was drinking around. And then I woke up the next morning and I had somehow situated myself, don't even remember getting to my friend's house, and I had snuggled up with a goon bag as a pillow on her floor. Like just ridiculous, outlandish behaviour for that age. Wasn't even 18 yet. And that was what I was already getting into. So hangovers definitely hit different back then though. Like if I did something like that now, fuck, I would feel it for an entire week. But back then that is something that I did, underage drinking, acting like a complete and utter baboon. So that's one of the stories that comes to mind when thinking about alcohol. This next story I thought about was when I figured out that tequila is an alcohol that I absolutely cannot drink more than a couple of shots of. It's not really a drink of choice for me. Like I like a margarita, but I don't really drink 10 margaritas or anything. So this night, I think I was around 22 years old. I'd just moved to the Gold Coast recently. I was seeing one of my ex-boyfriends at the time, and I think I mentioned this in my Secret Sex Work episode, but in that episode, I talk about his ex-girlfriend on a job with me stealing my clothes once we were all done. So I didn't have any clothes to get dressed into after I was on a job with her. Anyway, I ended up seeing her at a club called Sin City on the Gold Coast. If you know, you know. Probably would never step foot in there again now, but back then it was the shit. I was super wasted. I was with some of my friends. I ended up throwing a drink over her. I got kicked out by 2 security guards holding me up and literally taking my feet off the floor and forcing me out of the nightclub. After that, I ended up going to, I'm pretty sure it was called Hollywood's. It might still be there. I went over there that night and I spent over $1,000. $1,000 that I didn't have to just blow. And I just sat in there the whole night, didn't remember getting home. Yeah, I basically blacked out. And that's when I realized that I only ever blacked out that badly when I was usually drinking tequila. Like as I got older, obviously when I was younger, drinking the bullet bourbons, like that would make anyone that size, that age, probably black out. But when I was older, I realized I had issues with drinking too much tequila. And for some reason, that makes me not remember my night. However, at the time, I really loved drinking Café Patrón. I didn't know that Café Patrón is tequila. So that's why I kept having blackouts when I was living on the Gold Coast. And it wasn't until someone told me, hey, you know that's actually tequila. And as soon as I stopped drinking that, I didn't have blackouts anymore. That was a night where I blacked out so badly, I forgot everything. And I didn't realize what I had done until I looked at my bank account the next day. And also having to rely on my friends that were recollecting the whole night for me. Like, I don't like relying on other people to tell me what happened because, I don't know, unless I've seen it or remember it with my own eyes, my own memory, I just don't fully trust that people are giving me the full picture. So that gives me so much anxiety. And after that, I stopped drinking tequila in large amounts. So tequila is also not my friend. Bullet bourbons are absolutely not my friend. There's definitely some things that I drank in excess and it caused me some issues. This next story was when I was around 18 years old. This one is really crazy because back when I was younger, 18, early adult years, I don't know if any of you will remember, but when I was growing up, fight culture was very prevalent. And this was before the one punch, one hit law came in because there was so much fighting going on. Guys would always end up in fights when, you know, in our group, anyone I knew, people were always fighting and girls would scrap a lot as well. There was a lot of times that I got in physical altercations when I was younger, and that was always when I was just super wasted. Like, it usually didn't happen otherwise. I wasn't really one to start fights, but there was definitely times where I felt like I had to defend other people or finish it. It's not something that I would ever get involved in now. I'd have to be pushed really, really hard to get in a physical altercation with anybody at this point. But back when we were younger, everybody was just fighting at the drop of a hat. You'd go to fucking Mullaloo Beach Hotel, there would be a DJ, that whole place would be going off the whole weekend, especially Sunday sessions, and there would be people being dragged out all the time for brawling. So when I was growing up, that was a real thing. I don't think it's the same now, especially with the new laws that have been put in, which is really good. I'm happy they did that because that actually made a massive difference. When that came in, there was a lot more risk involved in just fist fighting. And it's really random because when I went to America, getting in fights just isn't a thing, especially women. Like, it's very, very rare. Over there, it's just so different because you don't know who has a gun as well. Like, you don't know who you could be punching. Whereas over here, everyone just thinks they're a fucking Terry tough guy, and people just throw a punch whenever they feel like it and don't really think about the consequences. Anyway, this was one of the first nightclubs I went to. It was in Joondalup. For anybody that's a Perth local, you'll know where the places I'm talking about. And I remember seeing my first long-term boyfriend across the club trying to get a drink. And he was not the type to ever be disrespectful towards women. He was very well liked. And I remember seeing him getting pushed by this chick. She was a lot bigger than me, very, very tall, bigger build, like she had muscle. And she definitely would have been able to whoop my ass if I wasn't careful. But I had liquid courage. I was very, very drunk and I really didn't care. So I went up to her and I basically started kicking off, asking her what her fucking problem was, leave him alone. She was accusing him of pushing in, but I could see him most of the time and he didn't push in front of anybody. She was super, super drunk like myself. Anyway, we started pushing each other and started kicking off. I thought it was going to be potentially a fight between her and I, and it ended up being me getting my ass absolutely handed to me by two other women. So 3 fully grown, very tall, very well built women absolutely kicking the shit out of me. Before I knew it, I was on the ground and I was being dragged by my hair across the nightclub floor whilst getting kicked by 3 women at once. Didn't really stand much of a chance. I remember being on the floor holding the base of my hair, hoping to dear God that it wasn't going to all get completely ripped out. I had really beautiful, long, natural, super blonde hair back then. And from this moment onwards is when I ended up having to cut it off because of this. Anyway, these girls, I remember being dragged along the floor and I could see some of the boys in our group actually trying to rip these girls off and weren't really succeeding. And that's when I knew I'm in trouble here. There was a really big set of stairs down this nightclub and I got thrown by this girl down this flight of stairs and rolled all the way to the bottom. I think the one thing about being drunk when something like that happens is the fact that you just kind of ragdoll. So you end up with less injury than if you were sober. Anyway, basically they got kicked out. I was a complete mess, ended up going home, woke up the next day, sore everywhere. I didn't have any broken ribs or anything. I got off pretty good considering I was just really bruised and sore, but my hair did not survive very well through that. I had scabs through my scalp, and I remember having a shower the next morning and half of my hair just dropped out, which was absolutely devastating. I felt like at the time my hair played a big role in my beauty and my identity. So yeah, I was really upset about that. And I ended up cutting off my hair into a bob, which looked really cute. I liked it for a minute. And then I was wearing extensions nonstop after that. So my hair health went down the toilet completely because I was using extensions that weren't as perfected as what they are now. So that was a drunken story that I do wish I could forget. If I was sober, wouldn't have handled that situation the same way. It just goes to show alcohol makes you do things that you wouldn't usually. I don't think it's an excuse for like cheating and stuff like that. But when it comes to making impulsive decisions, taking on a chick that was like triple my size, and, you know, both of us resorting to that type of behaviour, it just goes to show what alcohol impulsively can make you do. You don't think of the consequences. And at that point, I definitely should have thought of the potential consequences because I copped it. There are stories I wish I could tell you guys about that are a lot more wild, but I just have to be pretty careful on the podcast. So by the time I was 25, that's when I feel like things started to change for me when it came to my relationship with alcohol. I was definitely ready to start slowing down at that point. Keep in mind, I had been binge drinking from the age of 15, and that's like a solid 10 years straight of very heavy partying. I've spoken about this in one of my earlier episodes, but initially when I moved away from Perth, it was to get away from the people that I was hanging around with at the time. I was involved with a group of people, well, multiple groups of people that were consistently doing heavy drugs. And I had this dream of being a glamour model. So that dream in my career really pulled me out of that dark place because the heavy drug use mixed with the drinking as well was really putting me in a bad mindset. I was getting super suicidal. And that took me away from quite a lot of binge drinking too. It definitely slowed down when I went to the Gold Coast. People were just a lot more focused on their well-being and careers compared to who I grew up with in Perth. So that was something that really changed the tone of my drinking habits. When I moved to America, I got involved in some more drinking then. I was living by myself. I was partying. I was meeting all different kinds of cool people, celebrities, lots of cool house parties. By the time I came back, I had recognized that alcohol really wasn't doing me any favors. Obviously, leaving Perth previously, the drugs were an issue, but then I started seeing just how much alcohol was having a negative effect on me. And this was before being diagnosed with ADHD. So I was aware that I was having exceptionally bad come downs because I would have what I would call a come down from alcohol. And it was heavily affecting my mood, the way I would function for a week afterwards. I was starting to wake up to the fact that alcohol just didn't align with me in the amounts that I was drinking it in and how frequently. However, when I moved back to LA again, because I've lived there twice, I was touring with the Chainsmokers. I wasn't drinking that much when I was there. I never fully felt comfortable drinking in excessive amounts because we were associating with people that I just didn't feel comfortable, getting drunk around and making a fool out of myself. So I didn't party heavily too much over in America. I had a couple of hangovers, but it was nothing serious. And I felt like my relationship with alcohol and drugs back then was at a good level. I was happy with it. It wasn't too much. It wasn't excessive, and I wasn't feeling it negatively affect my life. However, when I moved back to Australia during COVID, and I was waiting for my green card. If you're interested in hearing the story about that, you can listen to the episode about my visa nightmare in one of the previous weeks. But when I came back, I absolutely well and truly pin dropped directly into the deep end, into as many drugs and alcohol as possible. This episode's really more about alcohol, but I was drinking in excess. Like I truly was. Well, had no idea what was happening with my life. Then I ended up breaking things off with my ex and, all that other drama started, which again, you'd be able to hear about in other episodes. I ended up being just a complete mess. Like 2020 was a bit of a blur. I think it was for many people. Everybody was going through it. COVID was just a complete and utter nightmare. And I just spent most of my time pretty wasted. Like I ended up secretly day drinking as well, which I just wasn't telling people about because I just didn't really want to face reality. I think alcohol was always, and drugs was always just a big escapism for me. And I definitely abused that during that time. I remember rolling out of bed, having some vodka that was just hidden in my room. And I went and met up with my friend at one of the local cafes. And I had a hat that said stress less, a blue t-shirt that said health is wealth by Sporty and Rich. If you know, you know, that was very big back then. And I just rocked up with no shoes on, no makeup, which wasn't like me. I know a lot of people in Australia walk around with no shoes on. A lot of my friends walk around with no shoes on and I hate it. I'm not a no shoes kind of person unless I'm at the beach or something. So for me to rock up to a cafe with no shoes on was bizarre. My friend looked at me and she was like, what the fuck is going on? And I just was literally a walking opposite of health is wealth. I was definitely not myself at that point. And I was also trying to keep up this facade that everything was all good on social media. So again, you just never know what's going on behind closed doors, guys, because I was a big walking mess that year. And I did a fairly good job of hiding it when I was still posting pretty consistently. Back when I was younger, my life was so chaotic, and that had a lot to do with, the grief of losing my dad, the bullying, how that shaped me, being undiagnosed, being misdiagnosed with just depression and anxiety, and totally missing the fact that I had ADHD, not understanding myself. Obviously, going through your 20s is chaotic enough without all of that too. So adding alcohol into the mix definitely made my life harder than it probably could have been. And I used it as a tool to just escape, because escapism was something that I mastered pretty well those years. Even though facing your issues is what gets you through it, I was running away in the opposite direction. Alcohol played a big role in how I escaped my own reality and how I was actually feeling. Now things are very different. I'm back home in a place that feels like home now, which is crazy because once it didn't when I was younger. Now I'm around family, I'm around friends, I'm in a stable relationship. I have a better relationship with myself. I barely drink at all. I only do it at times when I'm celebrating or I'm in a good headspace. I don't turn to alcohol when I've had a hard day or I'm feeling like shit. I can understand that it does help a little bit with that. But for me personally, it kind of exasperates the shitty feelings that I have. To be honest, now I just value deeper connections so much more than the chaos of a wild night out. I don't know if it's just getting older or the goals that I have now working towards this podcast and everything that I want to do with it for you guys, building this community. I don't feel like I can be out every weekend getting pissed. It just doesn't really align with me anymore. I'm definitely not saying that I don't drink, and I'm not saying that I judge anybody else that drinks heavily or in excess. I think I just prefer letting my hair down on special occasions, and it just feels a lot more fun then. But I do have to fully prepare around it to make sure all of my work is sorted for the next few days so I can rot in bed afterwards. Like, I have so many responsibilities in my 30s. I can't just rail myself off for a weekend and, suffer for the rest of the week and not get my work done, not show up the way I want to. It will put me in such a bad headspace with the guilt of not doing what I want to do as well. So I'm going to tell you all the reasons why alcohol just doesn't really agree with me anymore. And I would love to know if any of this resonates with you guys as well. Okay, firstly, the hangxiety. I feel like everybody will be able to relate to this, specifically ADHDers, ADD, neurodivergence. The next day, waking up and immediately just regretting how much you overshared. This is a huge one for me. Like, I have overshared things about my own life, not other people's secrets or details, but I'm so guilty of oversharing details about my life to the wrong people because, I'm drunk and we're getting along and I think that it's a safe environment. Or sometimes I guess I've overcompensated for how I was really feeling and I've gone over the top by completely oversharing stuff, which has landed me in hot water before because one of the things about having ADHD or just being that type of person in general, like even if you're a neurotypical and you're overcompensating because you're feeling nervous in a social situation with social anxiety, you end up saying so much. And then the next day you're like, oh my God, how could I have told people that? They're going to use it against me. They're going to judge me. They'll remember it the next day and they'll tell other people. Like, there's so many times where my transparency has been used against me. So to be honest, I would prefer to just these days really monitor how much I'm drinking and not let myself get there. There's been times where my friends have been the same and I'm watching them doing it and I haven't been drinking as much and I've pulled them away to try and tell them and they're like, no, it's fine. And then the next day they're like, why didn't anyone stop me? And I'm like, I tried to, kind of thing. So it's amazing how powerful alcohol can be and it just makes you not your true self. Nothing is worse than getting stuck in those ruminating, looping thoughts about what happened in the conversation. Were you too loud? Were you too this? Were you too that? It's that emotional hangover that I think everybody can relate to. Sometimes even if nothing bad happens, you just feel this sense of like doom and guilt no matter what. And then you just get into this like anxious headspace about it. And then you realize it's just never worth drinking that much because it would be so much better waking up fresh the next day, capable of doing what you need to do and not feeling that anxiety. Like, it gets pretty old after a while. It doesn't ever seem to stop. The only time it stops is when you get control of how much you're drinking. Like I said before, when I got beaten up by those 3 girls, alcohol tends to be a bit of a confidence trap. So you can get pretty cocky, not really think things through, do things that you usually wouldn't because you're not thinking about the consequences. That false sense of confidence is really toxic. And, maybe a drink or 2, and then it gives you the confidence to go up to someone and talk to them when you usually wouldn't if you were completely sober. Like, that's different. But when you're binge drinking, you're absolutely drunk and then you go and do something that you wouldn't ever dream of doing sober. That's when it ends up being a problem. Blacking out and having to rely on other people's recollections of the evening is a massive trigger for me. And like I said before, with the Café Patrón and that happening that night, I didn't do it again after that. That was back when I was 22 years old. And to this day, I'm now in my 30s and I haven't done that since. That really messed me up. The last time that I did that, I swore to myself I was never going to do it again. But yeah, blacking out for me is absolutely terrifying. I think everybody should be quite terrified of blacking out, not knowing what happened that night, because it's really scary and those memories often do not come back to you. Alcohol the next day really messes with my gut health. And I think another role that plays in that is the fact that when I've been drinking, the last thing I can do the next day is then go and indulge in a salad. I can't eat healthy food or light food after drinking. I need fats, I need carbs, I need greasy, oily proteins. I cannot do the healthy routine that I have for myself each week. I can't stick to a plan. It completely depletes my gut health. I feel it for days afterwards. I'm bloated. I'm sluggish. It's just horrible. And it's the same every single time. Like, if somebody gave me a healthy plate of food after drinking, I'm completely disinterested. And then I go through all the waves and shame of guilt for not sticking to my usual plan, my usual sense of structure, my healthy wellness regime, which I've built for myself. I get really, really down in the dumps if I don't stick to those things that keep me healthy and happy. So it really affects my mental health when I drink. But when I fall out of routine, the guilt that I feel towards that is really, really strong. And it's just not worth it to me anymore. Don't get me wrong. I love a wine with dinner. I love a couple of cocktails with dinner or lunch or whatever and just get a little bit of a buzz. But going overboard for me now is specifically for special occasions. I don't actually remember the last time I had a really severe hangover. And it feels good. Like, I'm not 100% sober. I think I probably could be. A lot of people I know are either heavy drinkers or they don't drink at all. But I think I'm one of those people that kind of falls more in the middle, and not remembering the last time I was drunk is a real achievement. Compared to what I used to be like, it's a really good achievement. And honestly, I put it all down to just wanting to thrive in my career. This podcast, I didn't drink for an entire year. I think I had like a wine once or twice with dinner, but I hadn't got drunk for an entire year because the self-doubt that creeps in for me and the imposter syndrome and all of those negative thoughts that roll in the next day after drinking are not worth it. And I think I would have had so much self-doubt that I probably wouldn't have been able to get this launched and off the ground. Obviously, I open up to you guys about so much on here with my personal life. I wouldn't be able to do that if I was drinking regularly. Like, I just wouldn't. It's just not something I would be able to pull off. I needed to be in a really clear headspace. I needed to be able to do this without the self-doubt, without the questioning whether I'm doing the right thing. I felt called to doing this for a reason, and alcohol would have stopped me from doing it. Since cutting back on binge drinking and basically barely drinking anymore, I've noticed how much better my mental clarity is, and I feel my emotions more. I'm way more in tune with my body, how I'm actually feeling. I suppress my emotions far less. I'm actually able to feel them and recognize them. And I think it actually builds a lot more emotional intelligence for myself, being able to understand where I'm at, how I'm feeling, instead of just running away from my problems. Because keep in mind, I did that a lot. Most of my young adult years, I was just running away from my issues, and in my teen years as well. So it's made me so much more present by cutting down the alcohol. Since drinking less, I've really understood how much I was relying on alcohol to loosen up in social situations. I don't think it helped when I was in the DJ industry, when I was touring around Australia and internationally. Some of you might not know that, but I was a DJ for a while. I absolutely loved it, but it did also come with a big party culture. So I was doing that in my mid-20s, and every time before getting on stage, playing a show, I would have a double shot vodka on the rocks. That was something that just took the edge off slightly for me to get on the microphone, because I was very interactive with the crowd, which I think sets you apart from a lot of DJs. Like, your performance is really important, how much you connect with the crowd. You know, just playing a good set and not saying boo on the microphone doesn't really work. And especially playing heavy bass music like myself, I got really into it, but I felt like I wasn't able to do that unless I had had that crutch of 2 shots. It would be really interesting to play a show now and not do that. I never let myself get super drunk when I was doing it. I'd always get wasted afterwards with people, but I would never do it when playing a show. But alcohol was definitely something that helped me get on the microphone at the time. I wonder if it would be different for me now. Looking back, I think drunk me would blame saying certain things or doing certain things on the fact that I was wasted. And something that builds a lot more trust within myself is not using that as an excuse, and really knowing what I'm saying and showing up as myself in situations with other people, not being wasted, making mistakes, saying the wrong thing. You know, it builds trust within yourself because you know how you're showing up and you're not making mistakes like that. And also, you're not blaming it on alcohol. You're taking responsibility for what you're saying and how you're acting. And it's nice to do that and not be making excuses for how you're showing up. There's no more blaming drunk me for oversharing. If I'm going to overshare, I'm doing it sober, and I'm doing it with people that I feel comfortable doing it with. And I don't have to wake up the next day and go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I don't have drunk me to blame. And that definitely has built a lot more trust within myself. Overall, since stopping binge drinking, I feel like I have so much more control over my life. I have no more lost days recovering from hangovers. I'm staying consistent with my goals, my mental health, my self-care, which is huge for me. And overall, I've just developed a deeper connection within myself, and I'm no longer running away from my problems and trying to escape, which has been a really huge shift in my own happiness and the way that I just move day to day in my own life. When I was younger, I obviously didn't know that I had ADHD, so I went undiagnosed for most of my life up until I was 30. So I had absolutely no idea the effect that alcohol had on the ADHD brain, and it makes so much sense now I've learnt about it. It's really not good for us, unfortunately. It can make us feel really good at the time, but the crashes that we have from it are really, really bad. And it makes so much sense now. I am briefly going to tell you some of those things that alcohol does to the ADHD brain if you're interested. So firstly, it lowers your dopamine even more. And people with ADHD, ADD are already struggling with their dopamine levels, which is the brain's feel-good chemical. Alcohol gives you a temporary dopamine boost, which makes you feel really good at first, but later your dopamine levels crash even more, which can make the symptoms of ADD and ADHD feel so much worse. And honestly, I think that ties into why I feel like I have such bad come downs from alcohol. Drinking can make it even harder for us to remember conversations, process information, and stay organized, even days after drinking. So after the hangover for the rest of the week, that can affect you pretty heavily. It increases anxiety and depression, which I've gone over anyway, but a lot of people with ADHD already deal with those two things because they tend to coexist with ADHD as a whole. And as much as alcohol can make you feel a lot lighter and better with that dopamine hit at the time, it actually ends up increasing both the anxiety and depression as you go along. So over time, it makes those things worse, making you feel more restless, more anxious, and even more down on yourself. Because of the way that our brain responds to dopamine, you are actually more likely to develop habits around the things that feel really rewarding at the time. So we are more susceptible to becoming addicted to things like this. And that's why you might find yourself constantly reaching for something that makes you feel good in the moment for that dopamine hit. But it also means that we are at much higher risk of alcohol and drug dependency. So that's something definitely to keep in mind. Overall, do I miss the big wild nights out? No, not really. I think I've really got it out of my system when I was younger. There's a lot that I haven't told you guys for obvious reasons, but yeah, I definitely had done my years of getting absolutely wasted. And, you know, by the time you start getting a bit older, you're not really missing out on much. I don't really get FOMO about things anymore. I've been there, I've done that. And the thought of doing it now to my body and to my mental health, yeah, it's just not something that I really crave like I used to. And I think just getting better in my own mental health and my wellness, it doesn't align for me as much as it used to anymore. Like I'm not running away from my issues. I'm not using it as a crutch. It's not a vice anymore. It's something that I use as a tool to celebrate with and enjoy things and relax. It's not something I run to when I'm upset or feeling frustrated or angry. So yeah, my relationship with alcohol has changed drastically. And I guess I just wanted to have this conversation for anybody else that is starting to feel that way. But yeah, you do start to get over it, and you might just be like me that doesn't drink much anymore, but you would never call yourself completely sober because like cutting something off permanently is a big call. I don't want people thinking that I'm coming on here to say I won't ever have a bender again because that's bullshit. It will happen again at some point, but they're just very rare these days. If you're like me and you're starting to get over the whole binge drinking era of your life, you're passing that feeling by, you're not as interested in it, my advice to you would be to listen to that and really tap into it and start putting yourself in different situations and doing activities where you don't have to get drunk at. You know, club culture, that type of thing might be getting old for you. Festivals, you don't have to go there and get absolutely shit-faced. You could just actually enjoy the music. I spent many years years going to see artists that I loved and don't even remember seeing them. I think it's so funny in Australia how people are like, why aren't you drinking? Like it's fucking illegal. The times that I have turned around and said, I'm just not drinking, I'm just taking a break, blah, blah, blah. And there has to be this whole discussion of it. Like I feel so judged for not drinking in this country. It's just wild. Whereas when I was in America, no one made a deal out of it at all. It was bizarre. So on that note, I want to know, are you guys sick of alcohol now? How is your relationship with alcohol? Where are you at with it? I would love to hear you in my DMs, comments. If you have any interesting drunk wild stories, you can totally submit that on my website as well. And I will look at reading them out on a future episode. The website is emotionalcontent.com.au. I hope you liked this episode, guys, and thank you so much for listening. Sharing some of my drunk wild stories is pretty fun, and just opening up the conversation around something that we all are pretty familiar with in our day-to-day lives is something I enjoy doing. So on that note, I hope this resonated with you. I'm sending you a lot of love, and I will see you in the next episode. Mwah. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a share. You never know who might need a little emotional content in their life. For daily feel-good posts, follow @_emotionalcontent on Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you're notified every time a new episode drops. Your support means the absolute world to me.